We're going to begin this hour live in North York, Ontario, just north of Toronto. We're getting an update from police on a 5-decades-old cold case. Let's listen.
Following the prepared statements, there's going to be a brief opportunity for some questions and answers. What I'm going to ask is that anyone with questions attend to the microphone at the front so that it can help people who need help hearing, and we can all hear the question properly. And then I'm going to ask that you identify the officer to whom you'd like to address your question. After the formal part of this press conference, I will facilitate some one-on-one interviews with the Deputy Chief or with Detective Nauman, as you would wish. I am now going to turn things over to Deputy Chief Almeida.
Thanks, Clint. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for attending here this morning. We have some very significant news that we wanted to share with you all and with members of our community. After 51 years, the hardworking members of the York Regional Police Cold Case Unit have solved the cruel and ruthless murder of Yvonne Leroux, who was 16 years old at the time of her death. I will turn it over to Detective Jonathan Nauman at the conclusion, shortly after my opening remarks, to give you details on the lengthy criminal investigation that took place since her death. Despite the sad circumstances of Yvonne's death, I am gratified to be able to deliver her family this resolution, if not closure. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been living all these years with such a loss and not knowing all this time who was responsible. We are relieved to be able to give them that today. As you've heard, Yvonne's family has prepared a statement which will be shared with you later this morning. I want to say how proud I am of Detective Nauman, Detective Sergeant Tom Kober, and Inspector Paulo Fiore, and all the hardworking officers who have worked on this case over the decades. And there have been many, including Staff Sergeant Joe Amatoguchi, who is here today on his last day in the workplace. Currently, our cold case unit is staffed with a group of persistent and highly trained investigators. But we don't work alone. The assistance of our law enforcement partners has been pivotal to our success in this investigation. The York Regional Police would like to thank the Toronto Police Homicide Cold Case Unit for their assistance, which has been invaluable in solving this case. Our thanks go to the Center of Forensic Sciences, the Office of the Chief Coroner, and the Ministry of the Attorney General for their legal guidance. Yvonne's case certainly highlights the importance of collaboration and the work itself. It's a testament to the dedication of the investigators that they have continued their efforts despite the investigative roadblocks and the passage of time. I can tell you, as a former homicide investigator, that there's a very real human connection between the victim and their families. Their empathy and the compassion didn't allow them to give up, even when there was no new information or evidence and little hope of resolution. Their tenacity, determination, and drive are commendable, and I congratulate them all for their work. Now I'll turn it over to Detective Nauman, who will provide you with the details of the investigation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm Detective Jonathan Nauman of the York Regional Police Cold Case Unit under the Homicide and Major Case Management Bureau. I am pleased to be here today to provide our community and the media with an update on a 50-year-old homicide that up until recently remained unsolved. On November 29, 1972, 16-year-old Yvonne Leroux was last seen alive at 10 p.m., walking in the area of Oakdale Road and Finch Avenue West in the city of Toronto. The next morning, a passerby discovered Yvonne's lifeless body in the middle of 16th Side Road between Jane Street and Keele Street in the township of King. This was 24 kilometers north of where she was seen the night before. She sustained blunt force trauma to the head, and her death was deemed as a homicide. Despite the efforts of dozens of investigators over the years, multiple appeals to the public by police on behalf of her family, media coverage, both at the time and several subsequent stories as the trail went cold, and a $50,000 reward issued twice by the York Regional Police Services Board, her killer was never found. Until now. York Regional Police, along with many other law enforcement agencies across North America, is taking advantage of advancements in technology to try to close cases that would otherwise remain unsolved. Genetic genealogical data is being used now as an investigative tool to identify suspect DNA left at a crime scene when other investigative leads have been exhausted. Investigative genetic genealogy, or IGG, is used in criminal investigations to identify relatives of the source of the crime scene DNA as a means to then identify the suspect. Having exhausted all traditional investigative means, investigators turn to IGG to assist with the investigation into Yvonne's murder in 2022. Using suspect DNA found at the crime scene, which thankfully was secured at the time and preserved for more than 50 years, a DNA profile was generated. That profile was then uploaded to public genealogical databases. The resulting information, along with an exhaustive review of public and archival records and evidence gathered through traditional police techniques, investigators will to identify relatives of the suspect and eventually the suspect himself. We identified Yvonne's killer as Bruce Charles Cantillon. Bruce Cantillon was a 26-year-old who was living in Toronto at the time. He was known to police having committed several violent offenses against women. He had also been incarcerated at various times in his life due to mental health issues. In 1974, 19 months after the murder, Bruce Cantillon committed suicide in Toronto. If he was alive today, he'd be facing a charge of murder. We owe our gratitude to the Leroux family for its ongoing support.
All right, we're getting an update from York Regional Police about a decades-old cold case, announcing today that 51 years after a 16-year-old woman's death, police have identified her murderer. 16-year-old Yvonne Leroux went missing in November of 1972. Decades later, they were able to determine that Bruce Charles Cantillon committed that murder. He committed suicide in 1974. Police saying just now that if he were alive today, he would have been charged.